you want to be successful? Do you want to grow your business? Do you want to dominate the day? Then you're going to need big Skip energy. Matt, welcome to the Big Skip Energy Podcast. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing excellent.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate you coming on. Really, just take a second first and introduce yourself, and then we'll get right down to it. Telling your story, which is fascinating.
My name is Matt Cox. I'm a former federal inmate, con man. I owned a mortgage company and mortgage company development company. And I was number one on the Secret Service's most wanted list. I was on the FBI's most wanted list. I was on the run for 3 years. I was sentenced to 26 years for a variety of bank fraud related charges, including bank fraud, of course. And I ended up doing 13 years in federal prison.
Well, that is quite the introduction. So, Matt, the reason I wanted to have you on the show is really twofold. One is because I think your story just needs to be told, needs to be heard. But the other is because right now in the mortgage and real estate fields, as you make the rounds speaking to different groups and audiences, times are tough out there. People might be tempted to participate in some maybe less than legal things to try and get deals done and get more volume in the door, put money in the bank, right? So I guess go ahead. I'm just going to turn it over to you. I want you to just tell your story if you can. And if there's something that pops up, I'll interject, but please, the floor is yours for the next few minutes.
The short version is that I was a mortgage broker, and I opened a brokerage business. You do it for a year or so and things go well or not well. And eventually I decided, hey, I'm just going to open my own place. So I opened my own place, and from really the first deal I ever did had fraud in it. You say light fraud. So, which means I had like a 30-day late. I changed like a 30-day late. My borrower was late on their verification of rent, and I'd white it out. Or I would, which of course led to altering W-2s and pay stubs, which led to pretty much anything that I needed to do to get the loan to go through.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't seem excessive at the time because everything was working. And even when I got caught, or the brokers that worked for me, because I hired about a dozen guys, when their stuff got caught, I very easily got out of it. You blame the borrower, or you blame the broker, or it was a mistake, not a big deal. Hey, no harm, no foul. Even when they caught us and the loans had gone through and there was millions of dollars in loans, nobody called the FBI. Like, nobody said, that's it, we're doing an investigation, we're giving our investigation over to the FBI. Like, nobody really was. They always acted offended. They were always going to do something, maybe, but nothing ever happened.
Was it internal, or like, what was it, like QC? Like, who was finding?
Well, I'll give you an example. One time I used to make canceled checks, right? Like the best version of, or the best proof of someone's payment history is canceled checks. You show the front and the back of the canceled check. You provide 24 of them. They can call the bank. They can verify, or they don't even need to. Not that they would. They see the canceled checks. They see all the codes. They go, oh, he's got canceled checks. They don't need to call anybody. So I used to make multiple versions of canceled checks. I had them from SunTrust, from Bank of America, from many different banks. And one of my brokers, and so what would happen is you'd have, let's say for $1,000 a month, we'd say the borrower's rent was $1,000 a month. You just have to take your borrower's name and their address and glue it or cut and paste it to the top left corner to show it's his check, and then fill them out.
Mm.
You make a copy, you send it to underwriting. They look at it and they say, yeah, this guy's pays $1,000 a month. He's good. They don't make a call. Problem is, I had a broker that actually sent the same copy over and over again to the same lender. It was a lender, was a Pinnacle Bank Corp out of Chicago. Mm. And so you got a broker who's closing 3 or 4 loans a month with this one bank. And eventually he gets the same underwriter twice in a row. And that underwriter was like, God, these look familiar. And then looks them up and says, oh my God, these are the same canceled checks. They're just different names and different signatures and different. So he filled them out. Somebody filled them out. Oh my gosh, that's horrible. So he pulled that underwriter, their quality control people pull all of his files for the last few months. And I get a phone call from the owner of Pinnacle Bank. And he says, hey, we got like $1 million worth of bad loans that your broker we've closed. And I'm like, oh, okay. I'm like, yeah, that's rough. Like, I don't know what you want me to do about it, bro. Like, but I said, well, what's going to happen? I said, look, if there's just no way I can't cut you a check for $1 million. And so he goes, well, I'm not worried about that. What I'm really concerned about is if these loans come back on me, I don't want to have to, I'm in Chicago. Will you just tell me you'll help me get rid of the properties? And I said, no problem. Keep in mind, during their investigation, they found an additional $1 million worth of bad loans with the same canceled checks that had already been sold to Household Bank. Pinnacle still had the $1 million, another $1 million they hadn't sold yet. They went ahead and sold them, knowing that they contained fraud. And his only caveat was, if we end up having to buy any of these back, you'll help us get rid of them. That was it. That's all that happened. Like, I've got calls from the lawyers from different banks, from quality control people, from the head of fraud departments. And most of the time they're just like, look, just give us the money back or help us refinance these or help us figure something out.
Yeah. Not really the best environment to dissuade you from continuing. I get that. Yeah.
No, it emboldened me. So what ended up happening was, at this time, I was also buying and selling properties. And one of the things I would do is I'd go in and I'd buy properties for, let's say, $50,000 or $100,000. Let's say it was a quadplex, a 4-unit. And I'd buy it and I'd renovate it. And then I'd sell it. Well, the problem is, you buy it for $100,000, you dump 60 into it, and now it's worth $250,000. I can't refinance it for a year, right? Seasoning. There's seasoning issues. How do you get around that? Well, if you're me, you sell that property to your wife in her maiden name. I never allowed my wife to take my surname. So our addresses were different. So I was able to just sell her those properties. So one, I don't sell them. I don't do the loan myself. I do it through another company, and I sell them to my wife in her maiden name. And the lender has no clue that this has happened. So those loans go through. The problem was, we acquired $1 million, maybe $2 million worth of properties. And many of the times we would buy them, clean them up. She would put a bunch of tenants in them and then sell them. So no harm, no foul. We're making the payments, but it is fraud, clearly. What ends up happening is, one of the companies I'd run about 3 of these through, 3 or 4 of them I'd run through this company, they ended up getting in trouble. And the owner of that company, who knew it was fraud, she and her husband wore a wire on me for the FBI. And now I get indicted. Well, I didn't get indicted, but I was charged. There's different ways to do it. So I pled guilty. I said, I committed fraud. I did this. Don't charge my wife at the time. We were in the middle of a divorce. I didn't want her charged. I said, I'll take the charge, put me on probation, but now I can't run this mortgage company anymore. Like I typically say in the talk that you heard. Like, I know what the right thing to do. The right thing to do was to claim bankruptcy and move in my parents' spare room.
Yeah.
But I was 30 years old. I just didn't want, I couldn't imagine taking a step backwards. I lost everything in a divorce. I'm paying $2,000 a month for child support. Like, my bills are $8,000 a month. I didn't know what to do other than to continue forward. And what it really did was it took the handcuffs off me. Because when I owned the mortgage company, I at least had a veil of legitimacy. Yeah. I was licensed. We were an FHA approved lender, a VA approved lender. We did conventional subprime loans. I had a good business. It looked legit, even though just underneath the surface, there was quite a bit of fraud that was happening. So what I did was I just transferred the company to a friend of mine who was a CPA, and he kept me on a small salary. And what I decided to do was I decided I was going to start flipping properties. Obviously, the problem with flipping properties is, one, let's say, and there's an area of Tampa called Ybor City. Mm-hmm. So the problem is, you go and you buy these cheap houses for, let's say, $50,000. you buy it for 50 and it's like, okay, I renovate it for 25,000. Maybe you make 25,000 if you sell it for 100, but that's the most it can appraise for. So I needed to figure out how can I get these things to appraise higher than that? Well, okay, I figured out that if I could just pay the extra doc stamps on the deed for the sale, then I could get them to show up instead of showing up at the $100,000 sales price or let's say I'm buying it for 50. Instead of buying it for 50 and paying $350 for doc stamps, if I pay the extra doc stamps, I could get it to show up for $200,000. So I pay an extra $1,050. Now it shows up plus the $350. It's $1,400. $1,400 ends up being a $200,000 sale price. So I'm buying these properties for $50,000, but I'm recording the values at $200, $210, $190, $195, $197, $240, whatever. Well, the problem with that, so now I've got these properties I'm buying and I can get the sales prices, but who's going to buy these things for $200,000 in the hood?
Yeah.
They're next to the projects. They're in horrible areas. The problem with the people that, even if you could do some kind of a straw man scam or I could give someone cash back, the issue there is people that in those areas, they tend to lose their jobs just before closing, or they don't come up with their down payments, or they have issues. So what I decided to do was just to start making my own borrowers. Like that's the reasonable thing to do, right? That's what everybody does. So I immediately turn around and I said, okay, I need to start making synthetic identities to buy these properties because they don't complain. So what I do is I figure out how to get Social Security to issue me Social Security numbers to children that don't exist. I make fake birth certificates. I make fake shot records. I then go into Social Security and I give them a fake shot record, fake fake shot record, fake birth certificate for like a 10-month-old child named James Red. And they issue me a Social Security number. Mm-hmm. I then turn around and I apply for credit cards, not saying it's a 10-month-old child. I now change when I apply for the credit cards, I would change the year of birth.
Birth year, yeah.
Well, keep in mind the bureaus have no clue of who you are until you tell them. So I create by applying, I'm creating a profile. Now, the first one, of course, it says no profile found, but the second one, it says there's an inquiry and this person does exist. So I would do that 2 or 3 times, get denied, and then I would turn around and I would get credit cards. I get secured credit cards in this person's name. So now I've got 3 secured credit cards. I start making the payment. 6 months later, I've got 700 credit scores. I have 700 credit scores. By this point, I've got multiple businesses with tax connected to real tax ID numbers. I have business lines. I have bank accounts to banks that don't exist. So I've started to create online banks. Like I would make a website for Southern Exchange Bank of Clarksville. You could call them. Someone would answer the phone. They would redirect you. They would verify your employment. So they would verify the bank statements. Keep in mind, this bank doesn't exist. This is all me. My people have cell phones. So I create multiple people like this. And all the names of these people are like James Red. So it's James Red, Lee Black. I had William Blue, David Silver. I think I just said James Red, Brandon Green, Michael White, because I was a big fan of Reservoir Dogs. So what ends up happening is I really don't know how many houses I buy. The FBI said I bought and sold 109 houses in Ybor City, but I think that's excessive. What I do know is I borrowed roughly $11.5 million in these guys' names. So what would happen is James Red would buy a house for $200,000. He'd buy probably 5 houses, record the value for $200,000, buy 5 or 6 of them, and then refinance it at, let's say, 80%. Let's say he's getting a loan for a $160,000 or $180,000. Well, I only bought the property for $50,000. Maybe I put $10,000 into it. So I make $100,000 or $110,000 or $105,000, whatever the case may be. I make 6 months, 4 months worth of payments on 5 or 6 houses. And then James Red would have a tragic accident and he could no longer pay. And all those properties would go into foreclosure. And when the banks started sending letters and the collections would start sending letters, I would write a letter from James Redd's sister, his fictitious sister, saying that he was in a tragic car accident and he had been life flighted to the hospital and he was currently in a coma. And if he ever came out of the coma, the doctor said he'd never work again. So I would give them a reason that this had occurred. They'd mark it in the file, and they might still make calls periodically or send a letter or two, but they have a reason, because that happens. People lose their job, they get into car accidents, they get divorced, they get incarcerated, things happen. And I would also always send along a letter, an article that I would take like a 12-car pile up where someone was life flight. I'd retype it and I'd put his name in it, that James Redd or Brandon Green was life flighted to Tampa General Hospital, currently in critical condition. So these guys, it was a great scheme.
Very intricate.
Unfortunately, after a year and a half, 2 years, a friend of mine who's a sheriff's deputy, who I'd done a bunch of loans for, came to my office one day and said, "Hey, Matt, can I talk to you?" And I was like, "Yeah, what's up?" And he said, "I used to date a woman on the Tampa Police Department." I was like, "Oh, okay." He said she was on a task force. And I was like, "All right." He said that was investigating mortgage fraud. And I was like, or bank fraud. I said, "Oh, okay." And he said, "Well, it was on you. And they just handed the task force over to the FBI and they're going to come arrest you." Now I'm already on federal probation. And the way that they ended up getting to the task force was formed because a friend of mine who was also I was helping him run a scam. He got arrested and he cooperated. So he worked with them to form the task force, or to provide information for the task force. Not that I didn't make it easy. What an idiot. Lee Black, Michael White, like how hard was it to put that together? Like every single one of these guys, I thought I was so clever. And every single one of these guys it's not hard to figure out. Look, you got 6 guys named Lee Black. He's got 5 properties. They all went into foreclosure. They were all purchased within about 2 months. They all went into foreclosure. Hey, look, you got a guy named James Redd. Same thing. Hey, look, this guy, same thing. So I ended up taking off on the run, and I took off on the run and I had like 80 grand. I had like a day to get out money out of the bank. So I got about 80,000, even though we had like $1 million or so we could have gotten out. And I had $1 million worth of properties. It's just not liquid. So I got out about 80 grand. I went on the run. I went to Atlanta. I rented someone's house. I made a fake ID in their name. I satisfied the loans on their properties. So I created a satisfaction of mortgage and recorded it in public records. So their mortgages disappeared in public records. And I then refinanced their house 3 times with 3 hard money lenders. I pulled out about $400,000 and I took off. I went to South Carolina, borrowed $1.3 million. I pulled out about $600,000 and I got caught in a bank. And I convinced the detective that I had not committed a crime. Now, by this point, I was assuming homeless people's identities. Mm-hmm. And so I've got a valid IDs, valid driver's licenses, valid passports issued by the DMV, issued by the State Department. So when he grabs me in the bank saying, "Hey, the bank is saying that fraud has been committed," I convinced him that the bank had made a mistake. I hadn't done anything wrong. I filled out a police report and he let me go. And at that point, I was number 1 on the Secret Service's most wanted list. So I then went to, I ended up going to Nashville. I borrowed somewhere between the $2.5 to $3.5 million in Nashville. And I was there. I was on the run for 3 years. And eventually I was caught. The girl I was dating at the time, we were going to leave. We were going to Australia because a TV show called Dateline was about to come out. They were about to do like a 1-hour special on me. And I knew that was an issue. There'd already been like 50 articles about me, but these are local newspapers. And I'd been in a bunch of magazines, Bloomberg Business Week, Fortune magazine, stuff like that. But Dateline was a big deal because there weren't 800 channels then. Mm-hmm. This was 2006. So late 2006. And so I realized I've got to go. And at that point, we were pulling cash out of the bank, and my girlfriend confided in a friend of ours who I was. and she turned me in for a $10,000 reward from the Secret Service. And they grabbed me coming home one day, pulled up and arrested me. And that is the short version. That's without the highlights, but yeah, that works.
Yeah, that works. So I know Kayla's trying to process all this. See, I've already heard it once. So.
Well, I'm also, I don't know if you know this, but I'm a loan officer. So by hearing all of these things, I'm just like, oh my gosh, like I can totally see why this happens and how this happens. And when you talk about these documents and no one's checking, and to me, I'm just absorbing it because that's a lot that didn't get caught. And
well, they were checking. Like you could call on the W-2s.
Yes. But
you could call on everything.
And I get it. And so I can see how it happened, I guess is what I'm saying.
If you think about a lot of the things that we do now as an industry, as far as your fraud guards, that kind of thing, are a result of some of the similar types of activities that we're talking about here. There's a reason for all of it. I'm sorry, Matt. What were you about to say?
No, I was going to say, like, you have to think after a year or so of doing this, and every time I would get caught, I'd learn, I'd figure it out. The great thing is they weren't catching me by owning the mortgage company. I was in a position that if an underwriter called and said, you're not going to believe what I just found, it was easy for me to say, oh my gosh, that's insane. Are you telling me that my mortgage broker, Eddie, did that? Like, why do you think it's him? How did you catch that? What did you do? Oh, you called? Oh, the tax ID number didn't match? How do you know that? Oh, you checked sunbiz.com. Oh, you checked the directory. Oh, when you called, like, okay, so I got to fix that next time. Yeah. So I just fix it next time. It goes straight through. So I got to a point where, back then you could order your own appraisal. So the appraiser would come out and he'd send me the appraiser and I'd put it in the package and mail it. Even if the appraiser said there was $1,400 in deferred maintenance. Let's say there's 20, it doesn't matter if there's 5,000 in deferred maintenance. It doesn't matter because I had the appraisal software. I had the Alamo software. Right. I would just re-put in everything and remove that and send it. So I just fix the issues I had with his appraisal and send it. And I would send, and so they could still call him. Keep in mind that I've still got a copy of his license, his errors and omissions policy, everything. They think it's coming from him. It's perfect. So there were so many things that they were able to catch. So a lot of people were like, oh, the banks weren't even paying attention, but they were paying attention, but they can only do so much. That's why when people say, well, they have to make it harder. Harder for who? Who are you going to make it harder for? You don't think I'm going to pay attention? I'm going to figure out a way. A guy like me is going to figure out a way around it. Yep. All you're going to do is hurt the person who works at Tire Kingdom trying to get his first mortgage. That's the guy who's going to be inconvenienced. I'll figure out a way around it.
Yeah.
It's really difficult to stop these things.
Well, and that kind of leads me to my next question. So, when I was sitting there and you were talking at Secure, and I kept thinking about Catch Me If You Can, right? The movie with Leonardo DiCaprio.
Yeah.
So, what are you doing to help offset future activities like this, if anything, from happening? Are you out there like consulting with companies trying to help them identify stuff like this?
I look, the problem, like I said, it's just the same thing. It's like making it more difficult. To me, it would really be one. I do keynote speeches, of course,
sure.
You know that. So I also speak with law enforcement, like Hillsborough County, Pinellas, Pasco. Like they'll bring me out and I give a talk and then I go through the motions and I explain what I did and they ask questions. It's a whole Q&A session and it goes on for an hour or two. And in the end, it really is like it's intuition. Do you know how many times I've been in a bank and I only sat there because I knew there just wasn't, like, they're going to run through the checks and I've already beaten those checks. So I know when they make that call, someone's there to answer. I know when they check that tax ID number matches. I know when they go to that website, it looks like a bank website. I know when they make that call, somebody answers the phone. Someone will verify the deposit. I know all of these things. I know if they go to for the phone number for the business directory, it's going to direct them to my phone number. All of this is covered. So I felt confident, but there were so many times when someone would sit there and they'd be like, they knew something wasn't right. And that's the whole thing. To me, intuition is huge. Like sometimes if they had made a couple of additional phone calls, they probably could have figured it out. They could have easily figured out the social security numbers. Yeah. They could have called, is it uscitizen.gov or the .org, where they can go and they can check to make sure that they match. At least they would have known something's not right because the date of birth doesn't match. It would have at least given them pause. But keep in mind, mortgage brokers and loan officers are not trained to look for fraud. What they want when Kayla is taking a loan application and something doesn't quite seem right, what she does is say, this is weird. And she asks the person that should be suspected of the fraud. So because your first thought is, I'm not understanding something. Help me understand this. And you're giving them the opportunity to say, oh, see, the reason there's no credit history past 6 or 8 months is because I claimed bankruptcy about 15 years ago and I just reestablished recently, or I was married and our credit cards were in my wife's name. And so we just got divorced about a year ago and I reestablished. Oh, they will come up with, because that's reasonable. But deep down, you looked at those people, you look at that and you think, this doesn't look right, but it meets the minimum requirement. This doesn't look right, but it meets the minimum requirement. I very seldomly ever did anything more than the minimum requirement. So I think that by training people on following their intuition and making a couple of calls, the other problem is people aren't incentivized. Kayla I guarantee, is not incentivized to catch fraud. It's in her best.
We don't want any more on our plate. It's like, okay,
right.
We've got so much to do. I don't even want to look into this. We take your client's word, onward and upward.
Yeah. Right. Give me what I'm hearing is, give me an explanation so that I can get around this to close the loan so I can get my broker fee. If you were incentivized and they said, look, the moment you catch fraud, boom, you get $500. Now, granted, you don't get your $2,500, but I get that money immediately.
Yep.
Like as soon as they say fraud, you're right, this is definitely fraud. The loan's not going to go through because you caught this. Cut me $500. That's worth it. I could probably, if I could catch 1 or 2 people a day catching fraud, like I'd be looking out for that then. Yeah. They're not looking out. There's just no incentive to catch fraud. There's no incentive to find it. People don't think it. And so one of the things I did, the funny thing is about the catch me if you can thing that you mentioned is that everyone always compares my story to Frank Abagnale's.
Right.
The difference is Frank Abagnale did all of his time.
That's true.
I wrote I got 26 years. One of the ways I got some of my time off, I got 7 years off for being interviewed by American Greed, being interviewed by Dateline, and writing the ethics and fraud course that is used by one of the largest national mortgage companies to teach the continuing education course. So every year you have to take, 9 hours?
That depends on the state.
Okay. So typically on average, roughly 9 hours of continuing education, 3 of which are on ethics and fraud. I wrote a course that is used to teach mortgage brokers, or how can I say it? To meet that requirement for ethics and fraud. And as a result of that, I got 7 years knocked off my sentence.
Okay. Well, that is a big difference, but that's all. That's something, unless I just missed it. You didn't share that with us at the talk in Savannah.
It's so little time. And I was told to focus on things that happen while I was a mortgage broker.
Yeah, sure.
The whole sensationalism of being on the run, it's sexy.
It makes it a better story. I get it.
It does, but they don't. If it's mortgage brokers or bankers or someone like that, like I tell it because it's a part of the story.
Right.
But I don't spend a significant amount of time on it.
Yeah.
Because it's already hard for me to tell the story without it sounding sensational.
Right.
Like, I don't really know how else to tell it. These are the things that happen. Like, I guess I could cry the whole time and apologize, but nobody wants to hear that. So it's like, there's no good way to tell the story.
No, there's not. I mean, you could embellish it more.
I don't know I don't know why I would. It's already bad.
Right, exactly. It kind of speaks for itself. But dude, I guess, is it hard for you to go into a place or go into a business and your brain not automatically turn on and start thinking about ways to do the same shit again?
Bro,
Is that hard for you?
The appropriate thing for me to say is, no, it was a different time in my life. And I feel bad. And
those two things are not mutually exclusive.
Listen, like I think about it all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. You'll drive by a house and I'll look at a house that I'm thinking that house has been for sale and it's abandoned, and it's been abandoned for 4 or 5 months.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how hard is it for you to change the title on that house, satisfy the mortgage on the house, take the deed and place it into someone else's name that I'm in control of, call up somebody in New York who buys houses sight unseen. They do a drive-by appraisal, close on that house using a virtual closing, and have them wire the money to a bank account that you opened online. You could do all that sitting in a Starbucks with their Wi-Fi. So I think about it all the time. The problem is that I can never be in front of that judge again. Like, I got lucky. Mm-hmm. My original out date was, without good time, it was 25. With good time, it was 2030. So I got out in 2019. So, like, I don't get another chance if I'm in front of this guy for anything.
Yeah.
Federal judges have great leeway within a certain section of the underwriting of the federal sentencing guidelines. I could get in front of him for $100,000 and that judge could say, yeah, I'm giving you 20.
Yeah.
It's 100,000. What are you talking about? He's like, yeah, I know, Mr. Cox. You got lucky last time. You're just not going to behave.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be it. And I can't be in that position. So it's not out of I would love to say that it is out of my moral compass has been reset and I have a grave feeling of ethical responsibility, but that's just not it.
Yeah.
I just can't be in front of that judge again. Listen, they got me. They taught me a lesson. Mm-hmm. I understand now. I get it. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. I'm so happy to be out of prison. Yeah. Like, it's so good out here.
Yeah. You're not going to risk that again. I understand.
No, people complain all the time. And I think you're so lucky. You have no idea how great it is.
Yeah. For you, it's a cost benefit analysis, really. You say,
right.
Works.
Yeah, because listen, I'm arrogant, obnoxious, narcissistic. I got some problems. Listen, my wife and I walked through. We had date night. We went on date night, and then we were walking around this area where I live, and we went into this furniture store, and we're looking at, like, there's a couch, and the couch is like $2,600, and the chair is $1,500, and the nightstands, like, I feel like we need new nightstands. And we look at the nightstands, they're $600. And I looked at her and she was like, wow, $600. I was like, we got two, that's $1,200. And she was like, God, that's ridiculous. And I looked at her, I said, she goes, what? I go, I really hate being poor sometimes. I really hate it. It sucks. She goes, I know, it's okay. It's not a big deal. We're fine. I like it really, because I can think of, listen, you give me 30 days. And she's like, all right, that's enough. Let's just keep walking.
Oh my goodness.
We're good.
It's better to be on date night than date line, right?
Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Real words there, Skip.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was proud of that one. Matt, is there anything else that you want to share with the listeners today? Because they are largely mortgage, real estate, and banking. So is there anything else that you want to touch on?
I think, and you know what's so funny is when I say these things, like, they seem so cliche, but they're so true. And I don't think that you realize it until it's too late. Nobody ever realizes it until it's too late. Does that make sense? So when I think about, and I immediately I feel like emotional, like, as soon as I start to say it, is that, like, I had a chunk of money. My mortgage company, they said, did like over 40 million. And that was just a cursory glance through the files. Right? In bad loans. I don't know. Maybe none of those went bad. I personally ran about $15 million worth of scams. I still owe $6 million. I thought I had all these great friends. I thought everybody loves me. And then you go to prison and you realize that all those people they don't care about you. Like I heard this a couple years ago, and I love this. Like, I spent all this money trying to impress people that didn't even like me.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think the problem is you justify things in your mind like, well, I'm going to do this so that I can get the money for my kids, or I need the money for this, and I need the money to put some money in savings, and I'm doing this so we can go on vacation. I'm doing this to pay my bills. And well, then you know what? Then cut back on your bills. Well, then buy a smaller house. Well, then tell your kid, we're not going there. We're going camping. We're not. Why? Well, because I could have changed a 4 to an 8, and we could have gone to Disney World, but I also could have gone to prison. So like, and that's really what it boils down to. And you always think it's not, you can look at other people and see all the things that they're doing and getting away with, but it's irrelevant.
Doesn't matter what happens to them.
It doesn't matter. What? Not just that, they may get away with it their whole life. Good for them. I'm concerned about me.
Right.
And when that FBI officer shows up and you start bargaining and thinking, oh, if I could only do this, if I could take it back, it's too late, bro. It's too late. And your kids are coming to visit you in jail, or you're on probation and you're a felon now and you can't be a loan officer. And guess what? Now try and get a job.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Try and get a job. Now you'll be lucky. You're trying to get a job selling used cars. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but you're working a job that you're not even qualified for. You're not even qualified to sell used car or change oil. You're qualified to be a loan officer. Like, trust me, going from an office job where you fill out paperwork and you smile with people and you're now a felon, you drop very quickly. Now you're learning how to hang drywall and work on a roof. It really is a brutal awakening, and it's too late. It's too late. So I just think you have to say, hey, maybe I don't need that house. Maybe I don't need that car. Maybe I need to kick back. Maybe those friends that say, what do you mean you're doing this? You're doing that. Well, you can't do this. You know what, bro? I don't need you in my life either. Like, maybe you need to reevaluate who your friends are. The way I evaluate my friends, unfortunately, is there are those people that will send me money in federal prison and those that won't. And it sounds horrible, but that really should have been how I evaluated my friends, because there was those people that only cared about me because I could provide them money, and they made money off me and they were impressed with me. None of those people came to see me. The people that came to see me were the friends of mine that had been friends since we were 12.
Yeah.
And they didn't care. We were just friends.
Yeah.
Those are the people who stick with you.
A couple of lessons. I think one of them is the recurring theme seems to be it's just not worth it. But also, you can also really tell who your friends are and aren't when the shit hits the fan, right?
Well, and let it be a story. Let it be a testament to you. This is a tough time for loan officers right now. And I'm sure some are feeling that pressure. They're not hitting their numbers. Layoffs have come. Layoffs may continue to come. And let this story resonate with people that they have bills to pay and lifestyles to keep up. And is it worth it? Well, I think your story is enough for them to know. And same with clients that are looking to buy, that want the house. I think your story in itself will be something that resonates with a lot of people. I
have friends that will tell me how that things are tough. This is tough and that's tough. And I don't know what I'm going to do. And I'm like, well, your lease is coming up. Maybe get an apartment. And instead of renting that paying $4,500 for rent, why don't you rent an apartment? You can get one for $2,000. They're like, in an apartment complex? The look on this dude's face when I told him that, I was like, yeah, with the commoners. In an apartment with the commoners. Maybe you don't need to be driving a $100,000 Jeep. Maybe go get yourself trade that in and get a shitty Jeep. Maybe your kid, although this is I'm sure this is a horrible thing. Maybe your son doesn't have to be in a private school. It would be horrible. And I'm sorry to say that, but guess what? Maybe he needs to step back and go to public school, and it may suck and you may have to have a hard talk, but that may be a great life lesson for him. Because here's my choices. I can start making things go through. I may end up in prison, or we can cut back. We can tighten our belts. We can cut back. We're going to eat some top ramen soup and we'll get through it. That's it. That's it. And so if you're saying, oh, this is horrible, stop it, bro. This is nothing compared to where you're going to be living when I'm in prison for 2 years or 3 years. Or even if you get a slap on the wrist. Where we're going to end up when I become a felon, trust me, we're not living here. I'll never be able to make this mortgage payment or this working a job, working in construction and starting at the bottom at 45 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Come on. Sometimes you got to have a hard talk with people. This is just the way it is.
Yep.
Like I didn't want to have that talk. I didn't want to be embarrassed or ashamed. That was a huge mistake on my part. And it is irrevocably changed the entire course of my life because I didn't want to eat a little crow and say, I messed up and I got to start over and I got to do this. I thought, the handcuffs are off now. Now you can really make some money. Now you got to slap on the wrist. I got to slap on the wrist. I was 3 years probation. That's nothing. Listen, even that could have been bad. That was actually a mistake. If they'd thrown me in jail, I think I would have been better off then.
Mm-hmm.
I'd have spent less time in prison if they'd thrown me in jail then for 2 years.
Yeah, for sure. So, well, Matt, if anybody wants to get in touch with you, book you, learn more about your story, where should they go?
I'm on LinkedIn, but I also have I have a website, bookmatthewcox.com. And I do have, if anybody wants to write, boy, I don't know. I don't know what's going on. That's what I've had 4 cups of coffee today and it's all coming down now.
All hitting right now. Yeah.
So I also have a book, which is Shark in the Housing Pool. And it's on Audible and it's on Amazon. And I think that's it. Oh, you know what else I was going to say? I do home title lock commercials. Title lock. So that's funny. Yeah. So like those are the kind I do the keynote speaking, speak at different conventions. I do cyber conventions. I do all of that. And I've got the book and then there's a website.
You do a podcast too, right?
I do. It's Matthew Cox Inside True Crime, where I interview basically 90% of it's just I interview other criminals, people that are criminal stories. There's a lot of stuff where I interview detectives and lawyers, things like that. But that's probably 5 or 10%. Mostly it's just me interviewing other criminals and what they've done and what they've been through and what they're doing now. So,
all right, man. Yeah. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show and sharing your story. It's always fascinating. I enjoyed it the first time and this time, no difference. So I really do appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you.